Welcome back. Tonight's story is one I still think about constantly. My name is Claire, and I was 22 years old when this happened. I was in my final semester of college, exhausted, overwhelmed, and honestly running out of options financially. Tuition had gone up again, my part-time cafe job barely covered groceries, and my savings had completely disappeared after my car broke down 2 months earlier. I was the kind of person who always believed I could work my way through anything if I stayed disciplined enough. But by that point, discipline was no longer solving the problem. That was when my friend Nicole mentioned a private modeling opportunity. She had done a few shoots before and told me the pay was dramatically higher than commercial work because the clients wanted more artistic and alternative content. She kept reassuring me that everything was professional, contract-based, and controlled. Looking back now, I realized she was trying to calm herself as much as she was calming me. The photographer's name was Max. He had a reputation for producing dramatic editorial-style images with strong lighting, unusual poses, and edgy themes. Nicole described him as intense but talented. She also told me very clearly that he liked testing models emotionally during shoots because he believed it created more authentic expressions. At the time, I thought that sounded artistic. Now I hear it differently. Still, the amount they offered me for a 3-day shoot was enough to completely pay off my final semester. Not part of it, all of it. Tuition, books, rent pressure, everything. That detail matters. Remember it. I told myself it was temporary. One uncomfortable weekend in exchange for graduating debt-free. And honestly, I thought everything was fine. I really did. The studio itself was inside a renovated warehouse downtown. It did not look glamorous from outside. The hallways smelled faintly like dust and old paint, and the freight elevator rattled every time it moved. But the actual studio was huge. Bright white walls, massive lighting rigs, clothing racks, makeup stations. Expensive cameras everywhere. Nicole greeted me immediately and seemed genuinely excited to work together. That helped more than she probably realized. I trusted her. I genuinely trusted her. Max, on the other hand, barely smiled during introductions. He shook my hand, looked through my portfolio silently, and started talking about angles, posture, emotional expression, and commitment to authenticity. He spoke fast, like someone constantly thinking 3 steps ahead of everybody else in the room. Before shooting began, we sat down to review contracts. He explained every category carefully. Certain poses paid more. Certain wardrobe choices increased compensation. Additional permissions required separate approvals. At first, everything felt straightforward, technical, professional. But there was one thing I noticed almost immediately. Every time Max discussed boundaries, he framed them as obstacles to better art. Not rules, obstacles. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. The first few hours of shooting were honestly normal. Exhausting, but normal. Bright lights heated the entire room until it felt almost difficult to breathe. My muscles started aching from holding awkward poses for long stretches while Max adjusted cameras and lighting. Nicole worked alongside me during several sets, and her confidence made the environment feel less intimidating. She joked constantly between shots. She danced to music while makeup artists adjusted outfits. She made everything seem casual, but slowly the atmosphere started changing. Max became more demanding. He stopped asking for adjustments politely and started treating every hesitation like a failure of professionalism. If I looked uncomfortable, he would say things like, "The camera sees uncertainty immediately," or "You have to commit fully if you want the shot to work." At one point, I asked for a short break because my shoulders were cramping badly. He looked disappointed, not angry. Somehow disappointment felt worse. He said, "The strongest models push through discomfort. That's why they stand out." And I remember feeling embarrassed for even asking. That was the moment something shifted psychologically, because suddenly I stopped evaluating whether I was comfortable. I started evaluating whether I looked weak. That detail matters too. Nicole seemed used to the dynamic already. She would reassure me quietly whenever Max walked away to adjust equipment. "He gets intense during shoots," she told me once while fixing my hair between sets. "But he always delivers incredible photos." At the time, that sounded reasonable. Now I think about how normalized everything had become for her. The second half of the day involved more dramatic concepts, stronger emotional expressions, more physically restrictive poses, longer shoots without breaks. I kept telling myself it was temporary, just get through the weekend. Graduate, move on. But fatigue changes your judgment in ways you do not notice immediately. Hours under hot lights, constant posing, constant pressure to perform, constant awareness that every decision affected how much money you would earn. It became harder to tell where my actual boundaries were, and Max understood that perfectly. He never pushed suddenly. He pushed gradually, one extra request at a time. One, "Are you comfortable with this?" After another, always framed like a professional opportunity, always making refusal feel awkward. That was the real pressure, not force, not threats. Just a carefully built atmosphere where saying no started feeling emotionally expensive. By late evening, I was physically exhausted. My arms hurt. My jaw hurt from constantly holding expressions. My back felt tight from maintaining unnatural poses, but the photos looked incredible. That complicated everything, because every time Max showed me previews on the camera display, I felt proud. I looked confident, powerful, fearless. The images looked like somebody completely in control. Meanwhile, internally, I was becoming more uncertain every hour. And then it happened. Toward the end of the shoot, Max started discussing future publishing rights. He mentioned that certain images would be significantly more valuable if released publicly through specialty magazines and online campaigns. I remember standing there wrapped in a robe, exhausted and mentally foggy while he explained numbers. Large numbers. Enough money to cover not only tuition but months of living expenses afterward. Nicole kept encouraging me. "These opportunities do not come often," she said quietly. I could feel myself getting pulled deeper into a situation I no longer fully understood emotionally. Part of me wanted to leave immediately. Another part kept calculating rent, student loans, bills, future stress. Max sensed hesitation instantly. He sat beside me and spoke calmly for the first time all day. "You do not have to decide tonight," he said, "but I think you are more capable than you realize." That sentence stayed in my head because it sounded supportive, but it also felt manipulative somehow. I could not explain why at the time. The final set that night became the emotional breaking point for me. The poses were more physically demanding. The atmosphere was quieter. Music had stopped playing hours earlier, and all I could hear were camera clicks, lighting equipment humming, and Max giving instructions. I remember catching my reflection briefly in a mirror positioned near the set. I looked exhausted, not glamorous, not empowered, just tired. That image hit me harder than anything else that night, because for the first time I realized the version of myself in the photographs was completely different from the person actually experiencing the shoot. And suddenly I started wondering how many people in that industry were surviving by pretending confidence they no longer genuinely felt. Max kept shooting. Nicole kept performing naturally for the camera, and I stood there realizing I had crossed emotional lines I never expected to approach, not because anyone forced me directly, but because I slowly stopped listening to my own discomfort. That was the moment everything changed. When the shoot finally ended, I felt almost disconnected from myself. The adrenaline disappeared quickly, leaving only exhaustion behind. Max reviewed images enthusiastically while Nicole cleaned equipment nearby. He kept praising my performance, saying I had real potential, saying clients would love my look, saying I could build an actual career from this if I wanted. A small part of me felt flattered hearing that, but a much larger part felt strangely hollow. I asked to shower before discussing contracts further. Inside the bathroom, standing under hot water, I finally had silence for the first time all day. And honestly, I almost cried. Not because something dramatic had happened, because I realized how easy it had been to slowly compromise pieces of myself without noticing. I kept replaying conversations in my head. Every moment where discomfort got reframed as professionalism. Every hesitation treated like weakness. Every financial pressure quietly influencing my choices. I stayed in that shower far longer than necessary, just thinking, trying to figure out whether I still felt proud of what I had done. And the hardest part was that I genuinely did not know. That uncertainty followed me home. The next morning, Nicole texted me excitedly about continuing the shoot schedule. Meanwhile, I barely slept. My body hurt everywhere, but emotionally. What disturbed me most was realizing how quickly environments can normalize things that would have shocked you only days earlier. I started noticing how often people in creative industries use words like fearless, bold, authentic, or committed to pressure others into ignoring discomfort. And once you see that dynamic, you cannot unsee it. Friends reacted differently when I talked vaguely about the experience afterward. Some thought it sounded glamorous. Some thought I was overthinking everything. Others immediately understood why I felt unsettled. Nicole and I actually drifted apart slowly after that weekend, not because we fought, but because we processed the experience completely differently. She viewed it as empowering. I viewed it as a warning. Neither of us was entirely wrong. That is what made it complicated. I sat with that for a long time. I think what hurt most was not what happened during the shoot itself. It was realizing how vulnerable financial desperation makes people emotionally. When you are scared about survival, your standards shift quietly, not instantly. Gradually, you start negotiating with yourself. You tell yourself temporary discomfort is worth long-term stability. You convince yourself you are still fully in control because technically nobody forced you, but pressure does not always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks professional. Sometimes it looks flattering. Sometimes it sounds like opportunity. And that realization honestly changed me. For months afterward, I struggled to explain why the experience stayed with me so strongly. Nothing criminal happened. Nobody physically trapped me. Every agreement technically involved consent, yet emotionally I still felt shaken. Eventually I realized why. Because consent becomes emotionally complicated when exhaustion, financial pressure, ambition, validation, and authority all mix together in one environment. I learned that boundaries are not just about saying yes or no. They are also about whether you feel genuinely free to say no without punishment, embarrassment, or fear. At 22, I did not fully understand that yet. I also learned something uncomfortable about myself. Part of me enjoyed the validation. Part of me liked being praised. Part of me liked feeling desirable and impressive in those photos. Admitting that made processing everything harder, because real situations are rarely simple. People want stories where somebody is clearly the villain and somebody else is clearly innocent. But life usually feels messier than that. Max probably believed he was helping models discover confidence. Nicole genuinely enjoyed the work, and I genuinely needed the money. All those things can be true simultaneously. Grief is strange. It does not always look the way you expect. Sometimes grief is realizing an experience changed your relationship with yourself. I became far more cautious afterward, not fearful, just more aware, more protective of my instincts. If something feels emotionally wrong now, I pay attention immediately instead of trying to rationalize it away. I also stopped confusing praise with care. That lesson alone probably saved me from future situations. Because somebody telling you that you are talented does not automatically mean they value your well-being. Sometimes they simply value what you can provide, and understanding the difference matters. I want to give you an update because a lot has changed. I did finish the 3-day shoot, and yes, the money paid for my final semester exactly like promised. I graduated 4 months later without taking additional loans. Ironically, those photographs actually opened more modeling opportunities afterward. Agencies contacted me. Photographers reached out. People assumed I wanted to continue building that career. But I walked away from it completely. Not dramatically, not angrily. I just knew I did not want my future depending on environments where my comfort constantly felt negotiable. Nicole still works in creative modeling today from what I have heard. We occasionally exchange polite messages online, but we are no longer close. As for Max, I never worked with him again. I still think about one thing he said, though. You are more capable than you realize. Because in a strange way, he was right. I was capable of enduring much more pressure than I thought. But I eventually learned that capability alone is not always a good reason to keep going. Sometimes strength means leaving instead. And honestly, I am still figuring out where that line should have been. So I have to ask you, if somebody technically agrees to something under financial pressure and emotional manipulation, do you think that consent is fully genuine? Because I still think about that constantly. I still wonder whether I handled the situation wisely or whether I ignored too many instincts because I was desperate to solve my problems quickly. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, you already know what to do.